a quick presentation on what is going to be built there and some time for us to talk back and forth on that. So please, without me talking anymore. Yeah, Jen's told me, and many of you know this, but this is not a voting item because this is something that doesn't require zoning relief and it doesn't require licensing relief. So it's, if a restaurant were to go into one of these places, then there may be a relief required subsequently. To build this, there's no zoning relief required. It doesn't mean that you can't have opinions. So please pay careful attention.
Thank you, Ford. My name is Karen Johnson. I'm with Charter Realty and Development, and I want to thank you for your time this evening. I know we're very short, so we'll make our presentation brief and try to really focus on the highlights from what we've heard through a lot of our community conversations. Charter Realty and Development acquired this property in October of 2014. You may be familiar with it. It's 198 Hanover, which stretches from Salem Street through Cross Street and then back around to Hanover Street. It's currently the home of Citizens Bank ATM. Citizens Bank has a master lease over the property and they control the subtenants. You also may be familiar with a billboard that exists on top of the building. Our proposal is to remove the existing one-story building located on Cross Street as well as the four-story building located at 53 Salem and replace it with a one-story, ground-level use only commercial building. The property is currently in the North End neighborhood districts, but as it's adjacent to Cross Street and the Greenway, it's also within the Greenway overlay district. And the uses are really controlling per the Greenway overlay district. So in the case of some of the North End neighborhood uses that may require conditional uses from the Zoning Board of Appeals, the majority of the uses on the ground level are permitted and do not require any zoning relief. So we're here primarily because we wanted to explain to you our project. We wanted to give you a little history about ourselves, and we wanted more importantly to explain our design process. And so this evening we have Mark Eclipse from PCA Architects with us. And we wanted to just explain to you what we've been doing over the last year and a half. We've studied this property over and over and concluded that the only way for us to make some reasonable commercial use of it is to remove the existing structure. There's a lot of limitations, a lot of constraints to the uses, which may be why it has not been the most successful commercial space in the North End. We think our new design really incorporates the best of the North End design as well as brings in what we think are wonderful interactive experiences in the Greenway. So with that segue, let's do it. We have some copies of the presentation if people would be interested. We have,
I can kind of, yeah.
Sure, that'd be great. Thank you so much.
I'm the secretary, so.
Thank you. Thanks.
I'll just get started because she's passing on. So we wanted to share with you our thought process and share with you why we made some of the design decisions that we did. And we've heard a couple of questions, and so we wanted to be able to answer those. And then at the end, we could have some time for everybody to ask questions. But so just so everybody is familiar with the site, you can see the buildings there. And as Karen had talked about, there have been the businesses that come in, they have a hard time. And we found a couple of reasons for that. The building physically is challenging. It's very shallow, very short. You can see it's fairly solid and nothing sort of that stands out about it. So it's challenging both physically and just sort of in its presence. So as a process, looking at the existing building types, especially the commercial buildings, especially the buildings that are on the more busy streets, say Hanover Street, for instance, you can look at the way the existing building types, the way that the facades are made, and we looked at that to help us sort of set the precedent for the design. It was the inspiration for the design. So typically, you know the buildings as brick. But if you look very closely, the buildings from the second floor up are brick, and they tend to have a lot more transparency on the ground floor. It's important for the retailers to be able to be welcoming and have people walk by and be able to see what's going on inside. And oftentimes, what happens on that ground floor, instead of being a solid brick wall with small windows, it's large windows, it's columns and beams. The columns and beams are often granite, sometimes they're painted wood, sometimes they are cast iron. And so we actually noticed this over and over and over, that you'd see this happening. They would also have a lot of wood infill to warm it up. So these combinations of these materials we found really interesting. And that again became the inspiration for the design. And then you see these buildings, you actually see this color, this dark metal color or painted dark color. So again, that became sort of the genesis. So the dark metal, the granite, the wood. So we really wanted to pick up on those. And again, the reason why it's those materials and not the brick is because that's what happens from that first floor down. That's what happens when people are walking down the street and things that they can touch. It's those materials. And our building doesn't have those upper levels. So we are essentially building this ground floor. So also, Karen alluded to a little bit again about why some of the tenants have been struggling with the building now. And we think it's because that building doesn't give them not only the physical ability to function inside, but the presence. Like I showed, it's very solid, it's very short. It doesn't really say, I am a commercial building, where you're welcome to come in here. So again, we looked at some of the more successful storefronts and saw that they have these details. They have operable windows. They have lighting at night. And I'll just regulate for a second. We heard a comment from a previous meeting how bright our rendering looked. And we'll say it won't. That's not the intention. It won't be that bright. You can see this. The intention is this warm, inviting glow. This is really more the feeling that you're going after. So these are successful because they're really alive. And they're really oriented to how people use them and how people interact with them. Another thing that is important, and I know I'm an architect, but it's really about the space that the buildings create. It's all the other stuff. And so the other things are this idea of an outdoor room, which right now, because of the height and because the cross street that's in front, doesn't form that room. And we use these ratios a lot when we're designing these spaces with our buildings. So it's the ratio of the width of the street to the height of either the buildings or landscape that encloses it. And so a good street is around 1:1. And you can see with some of the tallest buildings on Hanover Street, it's a 1.3:1 ratio. It's a good ratio for a street. If you have a large space that you want to enclose, it's about 3:1. When you get bigger than that, it doesn't feel like a room anymore. It's kind of an anonymous space. For a smaller plaza, 2:1 tends to be a better ratio. And so what we started to show here is this is a section cut through our building. Cross Street is right here. This is our site. You can see this is the greenway across. And then a question has come of why is it the 30 feet, 35 feet that we're proposing? Part of that is for the presence and visibility. Part of that is to create this room. So when you go up to that height and you have the trees on this other side of that, you get that 2:1 ratio. So we want to have that feeling of an outdoor room in front of us. Last one now. So
I have a question. Sure. So there's no chance that at some future date, someone's going to decide to bisect that building and make it a two-story structure by putting a floor in at the 15-foot mark and making it.
So
go-
I'll answer that one quickly. We do plan on an internal mezzanine, but a mezzanine is only a smaller floor area within the same space. So you can walk into the space and you can only get up to that mezzanine level from within that space. We're focusing on ground level uses, and so those ground level uses are uses that are adjacent to that pedestrian crossway. So for example, if one of the uses was a restaurant, you could walk into the door of the restaurant and then through either a lift or an internal stairway, get to a higher level and see over the greenway. But that is a specific building code compliant type of a space where you can't break it up without having some other type of access.
You can,
So no.
yeah, you can see, so this cut through the building, you can see this little platform up here. That can't be more than half of the floor area. So nobody actually ever could come back and build it because as of right, you can do that.
Exactly.
Technically, the definition is it's a one-story building and you can do a mezzanine. You can't ever fill that.
So you couldn't create Faneuil Hall Urban Outfitters 2-story, enter on the first story and go up a big stairway to get to a second story and have a big second story. You could have sort of a small second story.
Like a ceiling.
Or a couple of racks of clothing or something. So, okay. Anyhow, I'm sorry for the interruption. I don't know if you want to start questions. I know Victor has one, or if you have a little
Do you mind if
finish.
we go through?
Crescendo, okay, sure.
Okay, so again, one other reason, again, for the height is because you can see this building from across the greenway. It needs to have that presence, again, for the retail viability, for just really to form this gateway. In the past mentioned, this is the gateway to the north end. It's a very important site. We know how important it is. We do want to respect it. And we do think that having this viable commercial space that can be successful is important. So that's the other reason for the height. Now, this is an elevation of the building. Salem Street's on this side, Hanover Street's on this side. When we say it's 35 feet, 35 feet is measured from Salem Street. That's the zoning definition as from the lowest point. It's about 29 feet on Hanover Street because there's about a 4-foot slope up. And so you can see what we're trying to do. It has that openness and transparency so people can see what's going on inside. We pick up on sort of column and beams that you see in other places in the North End. There's bits of granite that sort of form the base. We have sort of a gray thin system, which I'll explain a little bit more later here. And then accents of wood. And then you can also see that the existing brick buildings behind us form that fabric, similar to what you saw on Hanover Street, where it's a ground floor that's more open, and the upper floors are brick. So that's the thinking that we've been going through.
Correct. Fantastic. I think we should start the questions.
Oh, yeah.
I have a couple of mild questions. What's the construction timetable and what's the inconvenience during construction?
Sure. One of the reasons that we have decided to just go with a one-story building is to minimize some of those construction inconveniences. And we've met early with the construction manager. We anticipate that it's approximately a 9-month process. And so what we will try to do is work with Mass DOT that controls the space in front of us to establish a staging area in the front.
So, you're not showing us this to say if we like it or not. Like, if we don't like it, who cares, right? You don't care if we like it. You don't care if we think it's too contemporary for the North End, or it's all glass, and it's not like the quaint North End that we see. It's like putting together a conglomeration of a bunch of buildings in the North End that you've seen, but doesn't really look like the North End, the entrance to the North End. But do you care whether we like it or not? You don't really care, it's gonna go ahead, this is what's gonna happen, correct?
We do, and that's why we're meeting. And certainly this is a process where it's an administrative review by the BRA. It's not required for us to come here, but we want to come and explain to you our design philosophy. And so, although we have heard some of the concerns related to the contemporary nature, we think that we all need to step back a little bit and look at the design influences. So we do believe it is consistent with the North End, and we understand that there may be some differences of opinions, but if you point to the materials, if you point to the scale and the nature of it, we do believe that it is consistent with the North End design and architecture. And one of the important points, I think, when you're looking at how new building fits in with the fabric of the neighborhood, and even when you're looking at something that, for example, is on the National Register of Historic Places, the Secretary of the Interior guidelines specifically say you are not to replicate what is there. You have to look at consistency of design with what is there, how you tie into it, but not to recreate it. And so with some of the issues surrounding tenants in that space and the inability really of any of these tenants to last longer than 3 or 4 years, we have to look at how that space can be used most appropriately going forward. And again, you've mentioned this before, it's important to look at our entire environment and how to pull into the interactive nature of the Greenway. We think that that's very important to draw people into the North End. And I've spent a lot of time out there really observing how people interact with this building. And they simply don't. They walk along the Freedom Trail with their heads down, and then they turn on Hanover, which is wonderful. But at the same time, if you're going to have a gateway location, and we like looking at this property more as a window to the North End. If you're going to have something like that, you have to invite people in. The current space simply doesn't do that. And we believe this design.
We get it.
Okay, couple
We
more
need
questions.
another meeting.
Yeah.
Yes.
We need to
There's a lot
talk,
of-
we need to
yes.
talk nuts and bolts on this and not just flowery concepts.
That's right.
You've mentioned the approvals or relief that you don't need. I'd like to hear at the next meeting the approvals you do need. I look at this photo and I see that you will need approval from the Massachusetts Department of Transportation for outdoor seating. You might need BRA design review, especially along the Greenway corridor. There's a bunch of things you will need. Let's talk about them next time. Let's also talk about how many units of businesses are you talking about here? Will there be any very large businesses? And if so, what kinds of businesses are you proposing? Those are the things that really...
Yeah. So let me make a suggestion as to pick up on David's point, because we're going to have to move on. We for Parcel 9, which is across the Greenway, we actually had a special community meeting. It was done at the new North Bennett Street School, where there was a much more lengthy discussion. And it was also a fairly emotional discussion because retail and the fact that people don't want the Gap to take over Hanover Street is really a very important issue for folks in the North End. And I think it was a very productive meeting. It started a lot of dialogue back and forth. Now, there was an IAG on Parcel 9 and an Impact Advisory Group that the BRA put together. You won't have one because it's a smaller project, but I would suggest it's very useful if you're taking community engagement seriously to take advantage of an opportunity to do something like that. We could come up with a special meeting. We could do it with other, we could make it a big venue if you wanted, and we could have a fulsome discussion on it. I don't think it's going to be a negative discussion. You may find there are things you'd like to do, like activating the sidewalk area in front of that retail complex, which is owned by a weird conglomeration of Mass DOT and the MBTA and all sorts of stuff. And you may need to clear some red tape to put those seats that you have in your artist conception actually there. The neighborhood might actually want to help you on that. So
The authority with that
get
is with the
together.
Public Improvement Commission, and so that's with the understanding they have with Mass DOT.
Yeah.
And it would be a licensed process with Mass DOT, but a PIC approval process.
Right, and we have written letters to Mass DOT on items like Parcel 9, and it was very, I think,
Just to
important.
keep it in context, though, we are reducing the floor area for what is there today. And the parcel size is approximately 5,000 square feet. So we understand the prominent location and the interest in the design, but in terms of it being similar to a Parcel 9 or a Parcel 11A, very, very different type of approach. And what we've tried to do is minimize the impact by sticking with a one-story building in Brentwood.
What's your schedule so that we can plan for the next meeting?
Our schedule is, we're really not planning on doing anything with this until the spring of 2017.
Would you guys commit to having a neighborhood special meeting just on your,
I think in a similar type of a forum, if you would like more time, certainly we'll come back for that, yes.
Can I just ask one basic question that I haven't heard yet? What's happening to the buildings behind it where there are residents? You've got people with windows, and I know that adding a second floor, I just can't tell from the design. What are the nooks?
We are not adding a second floor, we're going slightly higher than what's there today, but we are not obstructing any of those existing windows.
Okay.
And you mentioned the billboard, is that being brought down?
The billboard is being removed. Once the building is taken down,
yeah,
the billboard goes and it does not come back. Yes.
Why did you deem it necessary to take the building down?
We looked, as I said, we've owned it now almost for a little over a year and a half, almost 2 years, and we have studied it and studied it and studied it.
and scratched your head each time?
And
No more.
it is necessary to remove the existing building. It is not functional, it's not adaptable to a current use. And frankly, any use of what you may know of as the bread and butter space, which is very fragmented, any use of that requires removal of 53 Salem and those 3 residential levels above that in order to do anything workable for a commercial tenant. There's a lot of challenges with the
Right.
space.
Let me just,
You know that you guys don't know how to do.
They sold movies.
Yeah.
The space.
I think Martinetti's knew exactly what we knew, and that's why they entered into a master lease with Citizens Bank almost 8 years ago. And Citizens Bank now controls the space, and they are finding it, of course, challenging to lease out to some subtenants. So Martinetti knows, and we acquired the property from them. They had a very good understanding of it. The difference is an owner-operator. And so it worked for them for a period of time, and if you know the full history of it, at one point Martinetti family operated a grocery store there, then they split it to a grocery and a liquor, and then it became 100% liquor sales.
I'm going to have to cut everything off here because I know this could go forever. We do have a commitment that we're going to have another meeting, and we have only 10 minutes until we physically get thrown out of this building.
We didn't find out about that until Monday.
Yeah,
so that's
exactly.
why
So that's one of the reasons we're running a abbreviated agenda, and we're not used to running a lightning round, as all of you know very well. So we appreciate it. Again, we appreciate your patience. Thanks for
Thank you for your
saying you're
time
going to come back.
and for your questions. Thank you.